to Colourful, which, as you guys know, is a podcast where we explore how race shapes our experiences. Sometimes we laugh, sometimes we cry, but at least we are doing it together. And welcome to what is a really exciting episode for Sena and I today, where we are going to be reflecting on everything that's kind of happened across this first season and this first year of the Colourful podcast. You guys have sent us so much feedback on our socials and indirect comments. And so we thought we would take a lot of that, all the questions that you've shared, some of the comments that you've shared, and reflect on the year that has been. Should we start? Let's go.
Yeah, we should, Stace. It's been such an exciting year, and I think going through all of these questions and comments that we've received, I'm like a sucker for nostalgia. But it's been a really nice time to reflect, kind of like the journey that we've walked thus far. So I'm really excited for this episode. And so what we're going to do is we're going to just address some of the most common questions that we've gotten. And then at the end, we'll sort of do a more rapid fire questions, which I think, is going to be a little bit exciting. But Stace, let's jump straight into it. Okay. Reflections. The first question that we got, which was commonly asked, was tell us about the name and the red nails. What is up with the red nails? What is up with us always doing this, the pose, if you follow us on social media? So can you tell us about the name and the red nails?
Okay, cool. So let's start with the red nails, because that's the quick one, right? So between Sena and I, we are pretty much always on a webinar somewhere or speaking at a conference somewhere. And I went through this little phase where I was very into red nail polish. But the one day the one hand chipped, so I took off all the nail polish on that one hand, but I still had the other one going, and I did my whole thing. And then at the end, I said to everyone, well, do you want to share comments or questions, and the response I got was, what's up with the nails? And then Sena and I had a giggle about it afterwards, and we were like, you know what, that should be our thing, like one hand of red nails. So that is what we do with the red nails.
What about the name though? Why Colourful? I get this a lot. Like, what inspired Colourful? And it's such a layered story. So I'm actually really excited to address this. Stace, why the name Colourful?
Okay, so I think a lot of people think that the word colourful is some sort of similar name to the Rainbow Nation, right? And it's not actually that, because while we do love the fact that we look different and while we do want to celebrate that, that's not everybody's experience of living in this country and of looking different to one another. So it's actually the name Colourful is more a challenge to the idea that people who are trying to be inclusive might say that they don't see color, when in actual fact that's impossible. You can't not see color, certainly not in this country, not in this world. And so it's actually it's more like saying, let's acknowledge the fact that we do look different, that we are different colors, and create space for us to have those kind of uncomfortable conversations about color, and maybe through those conversations and taking a personal and vested interest in participating in these conversations in your own circles, we can then start to connect as this Rainbow Nation. But right now, the Rainbow Nation is really just about diversity, but it doesn't speak to inclusion. And that's what we hope Colourful as a name does for us.
Stace, I absolutely love that story. And I love that exactly that. We're taking the sort of narrative around the Rainbow Nation. And I think without context, it would be very easy to assume that we are like these airy-fairy, oh, let's all be together. And that is ultimately our aim. We want to approach everything with the end goal of bridging the divides, but our conversation is very much not sanitized, and it is turning that whole Rainbow Nation narrative of, it's almost like the Rainbow Nation is so indicative of diversity, but completely lacks the sort of inclusion element that we hope that this podcast really addresses. So thank you for that.
Okay, cool. So now listen, since you've kind of on this train of thought already, a lot of people have asked us, why did we choose the format of a podcast? Do you have any thoughts on that, Sena?
I always say that to choose a podcast was very intentional, not to platform ourselves as sort of like these authorities on race relations. In no way is that what we're doing, but it's such a powerful medium. And I think this past election, cycle that we saw in the US is such a testament to what we've been saying. When we started off this podcast, we very much started it off on the backs of, in our professional lives, we work in consumer research. And so we know, media platforms and the route to go. We also looked at the resources that we had at the time, and we thought that this had reach and was within what we could contribute in terms of our individual resources. And it's been so almost affirming to see how the elections in the US played out, where podcasts played such a central role. Literally, listenership amongst podcasts was exceeding listenerships on traditional TV and radio when the candidates came to those platforms. It became a much bigger conversation. And so that solidified to me that we are in an era where podcasts have democratized sort of what you can say. That comes with its downside, because a lot of what people have to say is still completely oppressive things. And so the downside is that. But I think we also counter that with the information that needs to go out. And again, I will reference something a good friend of our shows, Buanika Luanga, said, is that the narrative around race and history of Black people and people of color has very much been written from a very colonial and racial segregation lens. The oppressors had the means to define the story, and I think in every single way that we can to rewrite that story, we should. That authority shouldn't sit with media houses. It shouldn't sit with a select number of journalists. It should sit in the hands of everyday people. We should all be able to enter this conversation, and this is our way of contributing to that thought leadership, not from a very inaccessible way as well. Like, if you look at the tone of our podcast, it's literally me and Stace having personal conversations, and that is so important to us, because I think for far too long in this country, or all over, we sort of are afraid because we don't feel like we have the vocabulary to enter into these spaces, or we think that race is something that we should only leave to academics to theorize. And I really appreciate that about this podcast, how accessible it's been. And also from a lens of personal stories, not that you're an authority on something. And that's been really fulfilling. So that's my long-winded answer.
I'm there with you. I'm there. I'm holding on to every single piece of that. I think it was pretty much a good summary of why a podcast, why colorful, and why it has meaning in our lives. So thank you.
I hope Laura edits some of that out. So I also, since it's a reflection episode and everything, I have to give some love to Laura. If you follow us on our socials, you'll see her every now and again, but she sits behind the scenes. Try kind of like the calm to the chaotic energy that Stacy and I brings. And it's such an honor and privilege that she believes so passionately in this conversation as well, that she pours so much time and effort behind the scenes. But I mentioned social media behind the scenes, so you would have seen Laura. We got this question, Stace, and we get this a lot. People are like, "Oh my goodness, you guys!" Someone even said we're starting to look the same, and I thought that was absolutely amazing, because I think you're so beautiful. But people are like, "We love following your anecdotes on social media. It's clear that you two are best friends. How did that come about?" Oh, the story.
Oh,
The story.
are you asking me how it came about? So I'm spilling tea today.
Yeah, you are spilling tea today.
Oh, so Sena mentioned that we work together like in a professional environment. That is actually where we met. And we just started having conversations, quite a few, lots. Sena and I, we wear our heart on our sleeves. We've been told that quite a lot. And so we connected through talking to one another. I always found it quite fascinating. I've managed to wrap my head around it now, but it always amazes me that Sena and I are more than a decade apart in age. And I love that, because we really are besties. So she teaches me all her Gen Z lingo, and I tell her what it's like to be a mom. And anyway, I digress. But how did it come to be? So we met at Kantar. We had lots of conversations. We started talking about the importance of having real conversations. And we appreciated the fact that we are so different, both in race and age and life stage. And we thought that it was, if this conversation could be so relevant to the two of us in our different phases of life, and yet so connecting, and that it should be the same for other people. And so we connected over our love of addressing injustice and our love of life, actually. And then we grew to love each other. Aww.
Oh, guys, I am obsessed with you, clearly. So I'm really glad that the admiration and sort of like our friendship is something that people can see shine through, because I do believe that the personal is the political. I love that we can carry this facet of ourselves and this deep sense of justice and deep feeling, and almost channel those characteristics in a very like positive way, instead of framing it as something like that's a weakness or that's like boring or like where the down is. So it's been really fulfilling.
So we have had the question that kind of we've had the question to say, how do you take such heavy topics and make them sometimes quite lighthearted? Is that you trivializing topics, or is it intentional? And if it's intentional, why? And is it okay?
Yeah, Stace, I'm glad that this question comes up, because I don't think that we trivialize or make the subject of race lighthearted at all. Do I think that we use humor sometimes and vulnerability as a means of connection? Yes. And in demonstrating who we are, like who we are comes across in the way that we host, the way that we hold space for conversations. And I love our intro every time. We're like, sometimes you laugh, sometimes you cry, because that's the nature of being a human being. Um, and I think that there isn't, it's why we have comedians. Sometimes we have a balance of these amazing thought leaders, we have a balance of public facing people, and then we have a balance of like these comedians that come through, which they do so well. They use humor as a way to start a conversation, and the way that we sort of present is not to trivialize or make light of some things that are very, very serious, but it is a matter of like also poking and starting conversations and facilitating empathy and connection. And it's just also who we are. Um, I mean, you won't necessarily see us be falling apart behind the scenes sometimes, but we'll happily share that. So sometimes people are like, oh my goodness, like, you share some really hectic personal stuff in the podcast. And to me, it's all parts and parcel of the platform we're trying to create, of bringing the full spectrum of the human being. Usually when we speak about race, and it's why a lot of people are afraid to speak about race, they sort of get into binary thinking. And one of the things that Stacy and I love to say is that two things can be true at the same time.
And also just to say that our tone, especially with, well, on the podcast and then on our socials, it is very intentional, because it is, as Sena said, it's who we are. But it is also about making the topics accessible. So we don't want these topics to only sit in academic spaces where people with a developed and nuanced language can have that conversation. We're trying to make it accessible, and we're doing that by being very personal about our own journeys, which are not pretty. Like, we've had to, certainly I have had to admit some pretty nasty things, and I think we're all going to, if we're truly going to work towards being colorful, we need to have honest conversations, and it's not about trivializing anything. It's about being accessible.
And just on that topic as well, of like some of the more vulnerable things that we share. I mean, I've come on here and I've as a guest has said something that has moved me, and I find myself sharing something that I never thought I would share, because it's very personal. And then it's been really good and validating and almost healing for me to be able to like speak about that. But we get a comment like this one, which came through, and immediately I was a little bit taken aback. But it says, yeah, one of the people wrote on our commented on one of our posts, you are living in a bubble just because you have been validated by your circles. You think you are actually making a difference, but you are not. Get off your high horse. Although it's a little bit more of a, a comment than like a statement than it is a question. But Stace, do you want to take this one? Are we on a high horse? Okay, are we living in this bubble? No one really cares. Go back to your little circles. What do you have to say to that?
Well, I once rode a horse and I was kicked off it, and it stood on my wrist, and I've forever been terrified of horses. So I hope I'm not on a horse. If we're standing on something high, I'd prefer to be like on the top of a mountain or something.
I ain't even
No.
tried. I don't know why this is, I'm going to do that white people and horses joke, okay? Since you...
No, but actually, I think that this is a very fair comment, to be quite honest. I think it is absolutely fair. And the joke here was not to trivialize the comment, because the comment is very valid. The comment, I am guessing, is pointing at the fact of, so it refers to validation within our circles, but it could very well be validation amongst white circles. And I think that that's a very fair comment to make. So I want to acknowledge that it is fair that there would be a huge amount of skepticism about a white woman speaking about a topic on racism, when I've never had to, never once been disadvantaged by the color of my skin. So how is it that I can now have a conversation about race? So I think that's very fair. And it is something that I address and that I'm very honest about in our first episode. The point is, this topic is triggering, and this is a response that is very, it is very likely in more than just this one person. It's very likely in more than, in amongst other people. So, but the point is that everybody needs to be talking about race. White people, black people, any person of color, we all need to be talking about race, and we're going to mess it up sometimes. And something that I said may have been triggering, something that Sena said may have been triggering to someone else. This stuff is going to happen on a journey like this, and this is something that we all need to be aware of. But this is still our encouragement. Like, guys, it hurts sometimes. It's you feel so exposed and so vulnerable. Feel like a total idiot sometimes, and we have to acknowledge that that's what growth looks like. So I acknowledge the comment. I think it's perfectly fair, and I really am open to being challenged and having this conversation as much as possible, because my experience has only been how race has benefited me, and I want to speak out against how wrong that is, and that's kind of what we're doing today. Oh, also, by the way, I've had almost 40 years of programming on how to be racist, to borrow Graham Codrington's quote. I don't know what my biases are. So if you guys don't expose these sorts of things, or if they don't come up in the conversations that Sena and I have, or that our guests bring up, I'm never going to know about them. So I do need to know about them so that I can intentionally work at changing them. What has been the biggest criticism that you've received?
Oh, Stacey, other than critiquing ourselves, I like what you said there about it's tough. It's really tough. And I think it's the downside of having a podcast instead of perhaps maybe putting down our thoughts into paper, then having a bunch of people check them. I think the point is of the podcast is to be as honest and in real time as possible, so that listeners can also follow us on a journey, because we're continuously learning as well. But I'd say the most heartbreaking critique has been when I've been actually called a sellout on some of the comments. I've been called a coconut. I've been called I don't understand racism at all, or that I am privileged. And my sort of this for me is just a means of getting privilege for myself, and not really all Black people and people of color. That is very difficult. Again, I think I'll take a page out of your book and say that I think it's absolutely valid. I think we have a lot of people that enter into discussions about inclusion, but aren't really trying to be inclusive. They're just trying to acquire certain amounts of privilege for themselves. And I think the key to that is even in the context of a marginalized group. Within that marginalized group, there's like subcategories. And so I know that I have class privilege, for example. I know that if we were speaking on colorism, I like that would be a privilege that I have, able-bodied and all of those things. So I think there is a validity in, if I'm taking that criticism, is are you being intersectional in your lens of critically discussing race? And I think that I can understand the skepticism around that. And I can only say that I hope to be as inclusive as possible, even as part of a marginalized group. There are things, certain privileges that I enjoy, and maybe that may come out sometimes in my lack of understanding on topics. But I certainly, again, as you said, I hope that we are continuously challenged on that, and I'm open to that. It does hurt my feelings. Do I think sometimes it's not warranted at all? This is my brand, my way of connecting to human beings and trying to bridge this gap is through trying to facilitate empathy and understanding. And I completely understand if that's not the tone that people would want me to take. I would completely understand if, I've gotten comments of you should have pushed harder, you should have, and I completely understand that, but this is the way that I've decided to sort of go about it. This is how I can hold space for the conversation. So okay, so this one came up because, okay, so someone said to me, oh, you've been a little bit quiet, you're not posting as much. And I think we posted a video the other day, and someone was like, okay, like, good to see you guys again. So you may have noticed that we've been a little bit fatigued or a little bit MIA. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for that. So Stacey, I want to ask, what's the most difficult thing about keeping this platform going? And can you account for our silence or a little bit of a not as much of a presence over these past few weeks?
Yeah. Oh, guys, it's the end of the year and we are tired. We are so tired. It takes a lot. It takes a lot to have this conversation. The amount of prep that Sena and I have to do to enter into these conversations. I'm talking about prep in terms of content, obviously, but also just in terms of mental capacity and emotional capacity to hold conversation, and then know as well that as soon as we've published an episode, there's a whole bunch of commentary that we get back from people, and we want to respond individually to everything. Plus, we want to create videos to promote the material. There's so much that goes into it, and we also both have full-time jobs, and so it's exhausting. But I must admit, it's all of those things that I've just described are what keep us going. But very specifically what happened sort of in the past 2 months was, well, we had our launch event in Joburg, which we really, it was just so fabulous. And then I think that was on the 9th of September. And then as soon as that finished, we both almost just like fell over with exhaustion. But more than that, we've been struggling a little bit with like trying to keep the conversation going with very, very minimal resource. And so we've approached 1 or 2 brands to ask if they would be interested in sponsoring us, given the fact that we're now in the top 50% of downloads globally for a podcast, which we were really proud of, and that we've worked so hard for. And we've had the response by 2 big brands in South Africa saying, we love what you're doing, we support what you're doing as individuals, but we can't put our brand behind this conversation because it's too risky. And that really upset both of us, like quite very deeply, because there is an acknowledgement there that probably the biggest topic that we need to be talking about in our country is race, but brands can't get behind that. They can't champion the cause. They can't advocate for the importance of it because it's a risky conversation. And that really broke our hearts, to be quite honest. It really did. And then yeah, I don't know. And then we were kind of in that space, right, Sena? And then we went to go and watch a show, and we met quite a well-known South African celebrity. And he was like, oh, that sounds like a great thing that you're doing, or whatever. And then he was like, oh, but you don't have so many followers, like that's so whatever. And we were like, wow, we've worked really hard over 6 months to get that many followers. And he just trivialized it so quickly. And we were just taken aback. So I think it's fatigue. I think it's the constant like putting in. And that's what happened. But we took some time to like recollect, to plan for next year. We've got a really cool plan for next year. Some amazing guests lined up, some good content. So I think we are back. Hey, Sena, are we back?
Yeah, no, I think we're back. Okay, we always needed some time to recharge, and I really appreciated. I was talking to someone a few weeks ago, and was talking about this fatigue that sometimes comes with something that you can all acknowledge in society is important, and to be the one constantly trying to get people to enter into a conversation can be exhausting. So I think in the course of us feeling down, we really try to give ourselves some grace. And I also want to comment on why we felt so demoralized by the response we got back from a big brand that acknowledged that this is something that is important, and them taking a stand, but not willing to get behind it, is that we're not asking to be paid. We make no money. We're not asking to monetize this platform. We're simply asking for resources to keep it going, because we've been seeing enough of an impact to justify keeping it going. But we are funding everything, literally ourselves, through time, through so many resources, and getting all of that. And as Stacy outlined, it's a lot. We have full-time jobs. But as Stacy said, we are back. We're recharging, we're making plans for next year, and we're so excited. So you will be definitely seeing our explosive bubbly energy. But Stacy, also touching on that, we also got, as we've been engaging people on, get on board to help us keep the conversation going. Let's not be reactive. Let's not wait for a racism story to happen, and then all of a sudden, we've been asked to come speak on some TV programs and radio programs in response to racism stories happening across the country, given they will happen in this country. I don't like the idea that the discourse only starts with a major racist incident or an election coming up or something like that. I just think that for a country that is such an ugly history and an ugly present when it comes to race, this conversation should be commonplace. So what do we need to keep this platform going?
Yeah, so I think we've kind of chatted through that, but what I would love to say is, guys, this is the time to take personal accountability for engaging with this topic, right? We can't allow big brands to say, oh, sorry, I can't touch this topic, therefore there's no momentum behind it, and that there can't be support and traction. We know that there are very many of you who are resonating with exploring this in more detail, in having these conversations in your social circles and things. And we're saying, please take that quite seriously, like engage, be intentional about taking this conversation where it needs to go, so that we create a country that understands how important it is that we do this. Because guys, this can go the way of America in a moment. Like if we don't acknowledge the real issues that underlie us going about our everyday, the systems that exist are not in favor of everyone. And at some point that will blow up. It has to. And that's where we all play an individual and personal role. So it's really that. It's to share the content on this podcast. It's to share the conversation, and to really help us create this conversation at a more national level. And one of the very small asks, if we could, is it helps us get support if we can get the number of subscribers up on our YouTube channel, and also Spotify and Apple. But the counter on YouTube is visible. So guys, if you haven't yet, please can we ask that you go and subscribe to the podcast. You click the follow button on YouTube. That would help us a huge amount. Okay, Sena, I think we have... there's one last question before we get to rapid fire, which I think could be funny because we haven't prepped answers for rapid fire. But what episode do you think has resonated most with our listeners, and why was that the case?
I think definitely every time I speak to someone about the podcast, or they mention having listened and the episode that impacted them the most, it's our episode with Bwanika Luanga, and it's the title of the episode is called "What is Racism?" And that really blew our minds, because I mean, we've had it resonated the most, further than the more public facing guests that we've had, further than some of the thought leaders. It was this very basic concept of, well, seemingly basic concept of what is racism. And Stace touched on a little bit of like the personal accountability that we have in this country, where it's literally a pressure cooker at the moment of race relations and everything. And what keeps me up at night is the growing inequality gap. And I think that's inextricably linked with race, and that keeps me up at night. And so to have that episode, which explored a seemingly basic subject and how it resonated with people, to me indicated that people probably don't understand what racism is at all. They probably still mostly think it's just my individual relationship and how I feel about my neighbor. And I think that episode illustrated that is the least of our worries. How you personally feel about people is the least of our worries. It's almost like the structures that are so much more insidious and dangerous, but also how overarching they are. And the episode felt both daunting and almost like it felt like, oh my goodness, it's everywhere. Racism is everywhere. If you listen to that episode, I can't tell you how many people are like, oh my goodness, it's in the simplest things, it's in the most complex things. And it gets you almost like fearful, but also like intimidated of how do you ever tear down a structure like that, but also balances it out with the sort of hope that I got out of it, which is, yes, we can. And it starts with an acknowledgement, and it starts with a conversation. So it was such a powerful episode. It was both illustrating the extent of racism and structural racism, and also you can do something about it. You yourself, what can you do? Because at the end of the day, we are agents of change.
Cool. We are going to move to some rapid fire questions. To wrap up 2024.
Okay, Stace. Okay, so we're gonna ask these rapid fire questions. Both of us are gonna answer. Okay. So we have here your dream guest you'd love to have on the podcast.
Sena, we're about to have my dream guest on the podcast. It was always going to be Dan Corder, and we got in touch with Dan. He loves the idea, and he has agreed to be a guest early next year. So I think that's my dream guest. I don't know if we could shoot higher than that.
Dream guest.
Who's
Okay.
yours?
So for
Okay,
me,
who's
I
yours?
think, Dan is definitely, I can't wait to have him on. So Dan, if you're listening, we can't wait to host you in the colorful studio. But I'd probably say Zuleika Patel. And if anyone doesn't know who Zuleika Patel is, she is an anti-racism activist, and she's a Gen Z. So I think she's such a powerful and just what she's done with her voice at the time that we all probably know her from the Pretoria Girls High hair protest that the students did a few years ago. And I remember looking at that and thinking, oh my goodness, I wish I had a girl like that in my class to speak up for me when I experienced so much hate, trauma, and racism within the Model C school system.
I did say rapid fire, hey? So well done. It was
Yes.
really rapid then, Sena. So
Sorry.
thank you. Okay.
Sorry. Okay.
I'm kidding.
Gosh, give
Okay.
us a mic.
So
Give us a mic. The
hey,
yappers
give us
to
a mic.
yappers.
Give that lady a mic.
Just
Can I go? Okay. What is the most unexpected lesson that you have learned from a guest?
it's probably, I didn't expect to be so moved by the episode we had with Mogabo Jomo about hair. And what it did for me is, so I when she said that some of the guests at her salon come in with covered hair or wear a wig because they don't want their natural people to see their hair in a natural state, I was just like fascinated. But I could finally put a word to that, and it was shame. So yeah.
Oh, mine is also shame, isn't that? I was just thinking about my answer now. It was in our Jason Goliath episode when he was talking about being a colored person and how he was proud to be colored. And you had spoken previously about how you were proud to be of color, like a person of color, and what that means for you, and how it shaped your identity, which itself has not been easy, but that you are proud. And I had this moment when I realized I feel absolute shame at being a white person. And here's the thing. So Sena and I recently spoke. We did a collab podcast, a collab episode with the station is called Conscious Leaders, and the episode was all about shame and within the sort of bigger picture of privilege and racism. Okay, what is your most cringeworthy moment on season 1?
Guys, there's so many because we are so hypercritical of ourselves. I think people need to I don't think I emphasize that enough. Something that keeps me up at night. I swear I will be thinking about it 5 years from now. It was that episode that we had with Kwaniga of what is racism. And I used the wrong word to describe something. I wanted to say interpersonal, but I wanted to say interpersonal relationships, but I said parasocial relationships, which means something totally different. And it made the cut. So every time someone watches that, like, they see me use the wrong word, and I literally, I cringe.
Yeah, but what I said to Sena straight after that, which told me she was dying inside, was that nobody knows what that means anyway. So, she comes across just looking super smart. I was sitting there thinking, I wonder what parasocial means. I had no idea. So, okay, mine is also a word thing. So on I think it was an episode with Tando Hopper when I was trying to say something and I couldn't get the word out. The word is inextricably, and I could not get the word out. And then a couple of days later, after we'd published the episode, Sena was in Cape Town, and we were having dinner with my parents, and my dad just looks at me. He goes, "Are you inextricably?" And we just host ourselves because it's I couldn't, and then we just laughed because Laura let that one make the cut too, and we were like, "Thanks, Laura, was it so funny?"
Because speaking about that, most chaotic behind the scenes moment. Oh my goodness, it's so go tell the story. What was the most chaotic moment?
Oh no, it was so I wasn't recording in my normal place, right? I was at a friend's house recording, and I was sitting in this room that borders on a road, and most of the time I'm not aware of hearing cars, but I just felt like I heard every single car. There's a speed bump outside the thing, and every single car that just every speed bump was sticking nails in because you can hear it through the speakers. And then as I'm listening to the cars just constantly come past, there was this man who started sweeping the road, but the most dedicated sweeper you have ever known in your life. He was sweeping for all the world, this was just, and it just kept going, and he kept going, and he kept going, and eventually I had to interrupt. It was Mash, Sena. Do you remember when we were chatting with Mash?
Yes,
and I had to say to him I'm so sorry, but can I just interrupt you and ask the man outside to stop sweeping? Because I can't hear you.
And it's
so yeah, that was hard.
That was so chaotic. But that whole interview was so chaotic because mid-interview, I was recording at our producer Laura's house, and the both of us were sitting there, and you could hear in the background Laura's adorable 2-year-old little girl being like walking in the room and being like, "Mommy," and you can hear it come through on my feed. I think she even made it into the episode. And then just as that was happening, Laura comes in and like, crawls to try and like get Emma out of the way, and like, mute my computer because like we could get the feedback. But also then the electricity, it just goes away. We just log off. And at the end of that interview, Mash, bless him, we love him, Mash not potatoes, he goes, "Well, I thought that went really well." Sweating. We were sweating the whole interview. Sweating.
That was so funny. Anyway, Sena, this has been a really fun recap. So thank you, bestie. I'm looking forward to season 2. And to all of our listeners, we hope you've enjoyed season 1, the kind of the start of our journey here as Colourful. We hope that you will continue on this journey with us. Please find us on our socials. So we're on Instagram and TikTok. We really need to grow our followers, so by all means, do come and find us there. And also, please listen to the episodes, obviously, on YouTube and Apple and Spotify. And we're looking really forward to publishing again from January onwards. So until next time.